little bit of a workshop going on too. So hi, my name is Niko McGlashan. I'm a research associate at MIT. I work in the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism and the Civic Data Design Lab. And last summer we created a tool called Spatial Equity NYC. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to use it. We're going to create sort of case studies for various council districts across New York. And then hopefully by getting familiar with this, all of you can provide some feedback to us. We're going to hopefully develop a second version of this tool. And we're hoping to crowdsource lots of information about it from people like you, from different union members, and hopefully that can all feel like funnel into a refined tool and so forth. So it was a really great opportunity. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll start to take us through. So Spatial Equity NYC is a tool to help people understand the quality and disparities of public space across New York City. We're really looking at, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about inequities. In this particular case, we partnered with Transportation Alternatives. We're a nonprofit from New York, and they were specifically looking at how to make the streetscape more equitable, whether that's about tree canopy, whether it's about environmental factors, health factors, mobility factors. This was kind of their MO, and our way of working and like developing tools is largely through partnering with key organizations and helping them sort of accomplish their goals. At the lab that I work at, we have these two initiatives that kind of intersect at this point. We have this Equitable Resilience Initiative and this Digital Urbanism Initiative, and both of these come together to help us think about tools that aren't just for New York City, but we also work with Philadelphia, LA, a number of different cities, and each one of them is really hyper-focused and contextually related to what their urban issues may be or their rural issues, and they all kind of differ based on who we're working with, the urban context, and really it's really context-specific. So what is spatial equity? Does anyone want to take a stab at that, or? All right, that's right. It's a very sort of ambiguous, all-encompassing term, and it's kind of deliberate that way. Again, this is something that we can look at housing in terms of spatial equity. We can look at public space in terms of housing. We can look at resources, financing, economics. This is this cross-cutting way of us basically trying to approach this from a holistic perspective to really understand from a context-driven idea about how we can improve equity through the lens of what's essentially what matters to people. That's kind of the context that we approach it from. So in New York, certainly there's like a tale of two cities, right? There's places with huge congestion, and then places even, through COVID really amplified to show that some places really get tons of public space, are really flexible, while other ones are still really routed in this sort of automobile car-centric attitude. Some places are without any tree canopy cover, urban heat island. These are all things that we're all really kind of familiar with. And again, COVID really shows that certain areas had a far less adaptability, capability to adjust in a pandemic scenario where things had to start being expedited. So our question, and when we're working with transportation alternatives, we're just asking simple questions of who gets trees, who gets clean air, who gets benches, who gets parks. These are a lot of things that I think even in the keynote we were talking about, like who does get benches, right? And those are very critical infrastructure. Again, so this is with Transportation Alternatives. Their initiative is to give the streets back to the people. They have a 25 by 25 initiative, which is asking for elected officials to dedicate 25% of their jurisdiction towards public space, to take it away perhaps from vehicles or private or largely car-centric programs and towards a more public pedestrian-oriented use. I'd recommend that you take a look at this, but one of the main initiatives or main premises that came from 25 by 25 is that we're really looking at how we can increase the communication channels between elected officials and different advocacy organizations. Largely, this project first came about because one of the researchers at Transportation Alternatives was having a conversation with an elected official, and they realized they had no idea how many people commute to work by public transportation, how many people how many people commute, how many people are living below the poverty line, where are their core issues? So that's really what a part of this project was to just have a very quick and easy way to understand what some of the core issues are across multiple jurisdictions and at a scale that isn't really accessible. And that's kind of the fun data side of this project. So NYC Open Data, I think a handful, you can see a show of hands who's used NYC Open Data before. Yeah, it's great, right? It's really great. NYC Open Data is amazing. But there are some problems with it, right? This has been, as we saw earlier today, This was mandated in. There's a lot of different organizations, a lot of different departments, all uploading their data. And there's different nomenclature, there's different approaches, different ways of categorizing data. A lot of these there's an abundance of data, but it's not necessarily like instantly accessible. And I think that kind of creates, first of all, a value for people like us, but secondly, it also creates a barrier for people. It doesn't make it a public utility or a public infrastructure. And if we're talking so much about it being like oil or that most valuable resource, it really should be something that's public, right? So that's kind of one of the things that we're talking about. So we're all lucky. We all have the skills and experience to access NYC open data, but it's not necessarily the thing that when you don't have internet, when you don't have the skills, you don't have analytical capabilities, that is a sort of a major barrier, and that's something that we were thinking about addressing. There's all the different agencies that upload to New York City open data, or like some of them. Again, like that, if you even apply like a health filter, you can see that there's a sort of interesting plethora of open street locations, pool inspections, popular baby names. These are all kind of under the same thing, but certainly it's hard to even discern what we should care about when there's so much data, right? We're almost encumbered by that. And we're seeing even with new data sets and new natural language models, it's all about synthesizing things for us to better understand it, right? So that takes us to another point. A lot of this data, especially point data, is largely unaggregated. Certainly we can use an anecdote and say, this is about green infrastructure and where it is in the city. And I really couldn't tell you where it is, most prevalent or least prevalent without using anecdote. And so that's something that we wanted to have, is we wanted to develop in this website an objective metric for people to kind of have this consistent way of comparing and contrasting, again, with as legible as possible. So we created this tool called Spatial Equity NYC. I'm going to play this video and see if the volume works. What do you think? I love that video. It's so much better than the actual project. That video is so good. Whoever made that, really, really good designers. Let's see, but it's not good enough to play twice. So let's go to the next slide. Or maybe it is. There we go. We can skip that for a second. So we might think like, man, there's like 70 million of these dashboards already. Why do we need to make another one, right? Especially for New York. We're definitely not the first people to do it, but I think that there's this sort of unique opportunity, and the answer to something like a catch-all dashboard is not really possible. One of the papers that we're working on right now is about having all these different dashboards and how they all kind of work together. And I think that might be something we might see in the future, is seeing all these different dashboards start to communicate and bounce off one another, especially at the federal level. There's a lot of tools that are starting to, adopt indexes and different metrics that are kind of aggregated from one dashboard and they're brought into another. And that's sort of an ecosystem that we're starting to see. But one really great thing that we had with Transportation Alternatives as our partner with this is that they have this intersection of how they look at tools and this intersection of issues that we really had the unique opportunity to look at. So for instance, we have Vision Zero here, which is looking at traffic fatalities, but we can't necessarily see how traffic fatalities and tree equity might line up in a neighborhood or a jurisdiction, right? Those two have been largely mutually exclusive for a long time. And even if there are some, it's not entirely clear how they relate. So many tools, but they're siloed. That's sort of one of the first problems with a lot of the existing tools. Another one is it might be nebulous or kind of hard to understand. So what is a heap vulnerability index for this one? This one's really great, and a heap vulnerability index might be a good way to really for an expert, but it might not be entirely clear, right? So heap vulnerability index is one way, but we can also look at temperature, and it's total, we could look at urban heat island from a temperature perspective, and certainly that's measuring something different, but it might be good for someone that we're thinking of communicating this to that might not be a data expert, and be able to understand even what an index is, whether it's an aggregated set of metrics or if it's just a singular one. And secondly, a part of this is scale. So one of the things, one of the challenges with working with a lot of this open data is it's not necessarily coming into the scale of political intervention. So a large part of this project was taking all this information and re-aggregating it at the city council district scale, which almost exclusively never gets data just raw presented in that form, which is a shame, because like the city council district scale is a really good way to actually, like, there's a lot of open dialogue with the elected officials at that scale. They're really adamant on doing things. It's a democratic process, and that's what we're trying to assist and kind of aid in this particular circumstances, to really help with this democratic dialogue between advocates and elected officials. And finally, has anyone used EJ Screen before? Anybody? Yeah, EJ Screen is great. I mean, it has so many different metrics. One of the, certainly it's a bit older now. I think the EPA just came up with a new one maybe in October, which is also really great. And it really shows ED neighborhoods or environmentally disadvantaged neighborhoods. But with this, with either one of these, there's this sort of, there's a lot of information. It's, again, not being presented at the same scale, and it's really hard to even perhaps synthesize what this coral belt map is showing us right now. I actually have multiple layers overlapping, and as soon as you start to overlay multiple coral belt maps at different opacity levels, it's a question of color, and how we even interpret that becomes difficult. So again, what we're pointing this towards, this was kind of a challenge and something we wanted to address. So here are our three problems that we saw with some of the existing dashboards. And what we took from that was we have to convert this data into information. This data, data is only useful once it becomes information. It needs to be one site for all of these publicly, metrics related to public space. And it also needs to be presented at a scale that can be that can hold people accountable, especially in terms of like governance. So we started with a handful of different metrics. We instantly cut that down because we realized that was a lot of work. So we ended up with 15 particular metrics. So we're almost kind of in this beta phase right now. And I just kind of threw these together because I thought there'd be some data nerds in here that'd be interested in kind of thinking about some of these problems. So one of the challenges that we were working with was we're getting a lot of the data maybe at the neighborhood tabulation area or the community board scale. And we would have to, for instance, re-aggregate it into the city council district scale. So, if I flip back and forth, you can kind of imagine that these boundaries are different. We used a proportional split methodology to do that. And if we're just looking at Central Park, which is right over here, there's a lot of interesting questions that kind of came up. How do we want to deal with Central Park, for instance? And Central Park is one, but there's a number of different parts. And, if we're talking about like access to park space or, how do we actually aggregate this? Do we want to include Central Park? Central Park for community boards isn't part of one, but for city council districts, it is part of, or vice versa. It is included in an actual borough, or in a district. So what makes that difficult is when you're re-aggregating, you have to think, do we want to include the data about green space or bike paths that are included in Central Park or not? So there's a question about how we maintain that consistency. And like that was probably one of the interesting challenges as we're doing this. And there's like a number of different parks and, cemeteries or Rikers. Like how do we treat these particular anomalies in this data? How do we actually think about processing them? And like that would certainly sway the information about how a neighborhood's performing. And then we also have the neighborhood tabulation scale, which is a bit easier to kind of just zoom in on. So on the left, we have a number of how the data is kind of coming in, and what we really wanted to just convert it into was health, environment, and mobility. Those are our big questions here. We took all the information, we started to process it and get a sense. This is just traditional working in ArcMap before putting it online. We started to wireframe a website to get a sense about how we might want people to navigate the site, what it might be, like just front-end UX elements. Any UX or front-end developers in here? Hey, over there, hi. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we started to just kind of mock this up in Figma to get a sense of what that might look like. That slowly started to evolve into a bit more of a, site navigation. And then we landed on something where we have this like 5-column to 1-column ratio. So I'll take you guys quickly through it, just in a static way, and then we'll also go on it later on, and we'll kind of play around with this and develop little neighborhood case studies. But generally, how the site works is you'll start here. There's two certain ways. There's 3 different sections of the site that you can go through. The first being citywide data. So we might want to go to environments. We might want to see permeable surface area. You're first presented with this histogram to show exactly where a neighborhood might rank. So you can see the citywide average, and each block shows a different community board or council district. You can then you can pin that. You can see where how that relates to boroughs. You can pin a number of them. And then you can also switch to map, and I'm sure we lovely like maps, and you can start to see a really interesting concentration of different values, right? So if we're looking at permeable surface area, we can see that certain areas of Brooklyn are very permeable. Other areas, maybe in Midtown and so forth, are actually quite, they don't have permeability. We click City Council District 3. We can also highlight the neighborhood, the areas with the least permeable surface area. So we're really trying to highlight basically the areas that need more investment in this particular metric or this category. We can then bring up a demographic side. So these are all metrics, but then we can also include different metrics like different demographics such as poverty level, who's commuting to work, race and ethnicity. When we can start to draw comparisons, albeit just with this sort of side-by-side choropleth maps right now. But the idea is that you can start to maybe make some sort of inference about who basically has access based on a demographic characteristic. We can then so that would maybe be geared toward an elected official, for instance, that might have a sense of where their jurisdiction is. But in the more, for the public, they might just want to look up their address, right? So we have this search function. You can zoom into your neighborhood, maybe by just typing in your address, and it'll geolocate where you are. And then from there, you can see, for instance, this little tag will come up and say, your council district tonight out of 51 city council districts for surface temperature with 1.29 degrees Fahrenheit above the average. So it's this small little sound, a small little bite that I think is quite, by having this relative scale, we can say we rank 9th. And I think a lot of people are able to kind of take that and work with that sort of way of comparison that makes it a bit more digestible. So now if we zoom in, you can see that actually the granularity of the data actually breaks down a bit further. This varies on a data layer and depending on if the data was available, but in this case with surface temperature, we can actually zoom into the neighborhood tabulation area. So this means that even within a jurisdiction, we can then see who within that, this sort of inequities within a jurisdiction. And this might be really interesting if you are an elected official and you think, okay, well, I do want to address the surface temperature. Well, now you also have a sense of the disparities within your jurisdiction. So it's this sort of interesting way of breaking that down a step further. There's maybe an issue in your area and then where to actually do something about it. And that's, really turning data to action. We can then switch to a community profile, which gives you, hi, yes.
Quick question. Do you do any projects based on school districts?
On school districts? No, we haven't, but this is perfect because we're going to have a bunch of feedback at the end, and those are the recommendations we're looking for because we don't know what we want to do with this moving forward, but that's a good idea. So just kind of moving forward, and I'll wrap this up soon. So with this, you can start to go through your community profile and see how that community performs across every metric, right? And so we have these histograms and new ways of presenting data, and this is like a mini report where someone can kind of take screenshots, bring this to a town hall. This is our hope, is to kind of have this just so it's very actionable and very easy to kind of grab this information in a jam. You can break that into a tabular one if you want to use it for reports, so it's all citable and it's really easy to kind of reference. And then finally, we also have solutions. So we're action-oriented here. You can basically figure out what the issues are, and they will also link you to really important references that come from different planning journals and different sources of information to kind of reference what you could actually do and what you can advocate for. So again, this is kind of closing the gap on a lot of things. And I think that the solutions tab is actually something that's often overlooked in a lot of these dashboards, and that's also something that's really exciting about Spatial Equity NYC. And each one of them, Transportation Alternatives did a great job kind of bringing these in and highly citable, highly credible different journals and different planning agencies that basically have recommendations for every single issue we have on the site. So some of the things that we found just from doing this website, just from building the site, there was more miles of bus lanes in the top city council districts than the bottom 25 districts combined. In city council districts where the majority of residents are Black, there's 68% fewer streets with a protected bike lane. And city council districts where the majority of residents are Black, there's 39% higher rate of traffic injuries. And in the top 3 city council districts with the highest daytime summer surface temperatures, 96% or more are residents and people of color. So these are some of our findings. Some of the ways that we think about the design and processing through this, this is largely stakeholder based, this is scenario based, and one of the things we like to go through is really start to analyze, like, how might someone actually use this? We're trying to always think about an end user, and through sort of consulting with different elected officials, one of the things that we had was someone speak about how they were able to use our tool. So this is an interesting case study now that we've released the tool. And so in City Council District 1, a staff member was curious to see, for instance, what the traffic volume was. City Council District 1 is like right at the base of Manhattan. So you can see here that City Council District 1, it's just, as far as Manhattan goes, it's, it's not the worst, right? It's not the worst, but they're all up there. They're all up there. So that gives you a bit of a sense. Okay, so first of all, Manhattan seems to have traffic congestion, no surprise there. We can zoom into City Council District 1, and we can see that, sure, there's this sort of, dark blue really showing that traffic volume is super high. And always in all these, the darker the concentration of the color, the darker the color, the higher the concentration of something. So if you zoom in, however, you can start to see there is actually this interesting disparity within City Council District 1 that shows where traffic congestion is really happening. Henry was able to overlay that in terms of demographic characteristics and get a sense that, who's actually exposed to this high level of traffic congestion and all the sort of interrelated things about air quality, noise pollution, so on and so forth. And that was able to help him generate a sense of who they should be talking to, where they should be planning and strategizing their initiatives. Henry was then able to take that information, and then because we have this tabular way of looking at the data and we have this all referenced, it became super citable. And again, just to have like a sort of a point of departure, there's a number of protected by, a number of different recommendations for what they consider and could bring to an internal meeting. This is kind of the dialogue that we're hoping to encourage internally. And then also, at least this way, these come as no surprise when there's different advocacy organizations or bike groups or different coalitions arguing for the same thing to sort of promote this communication between them. And again, so you have these references that take you to different places. So when we released this tool, it's been great, and we've had a lot of reception. We presented this at City Hall. We've had a lot of different advocacy organizations follow up with us. We've also had a number of different virtual workshop sessions to get feedback, to get a sense of how this might be used, how we can make it better. A number of different people kind of all providing feedback, elected officials, and generally they've been pretty excited. I mean, that's kind of a good feeling because that really is our sort of targeted stakeholder. We've had some publication, we've had news articles when it first came out, which is fine. CBS did a whole bit on it as well, which is all exciting. But I think what's even more, or it's better, is when people are using our tool as a catalyst to tell stories. This isn't necessarily something that we anticipated, but it's something that's being used by news organizations, by Patch, and they're using and they're setting our site, they're setting our information, they're setting this information for news, for the public. I mean, that's exactly the kind of way we wanted to communicate this information. They're all being able to kind of expose these stories, unearth these stories that we probably all have thought about and know about, but now it's becoming citable, tangible, and really sort of in the forefront with numbers behind it. And then secondly, we also have this sort of decentralized grassroots way of people having open dialogue, right? So there's open dialogue happening, people are uploading photos, and there's just a sense of momentum that's happening that's beyond what we could have really imagined, which is really exciting. We also have different elected officials. We're also interviewing them, but they're speaking about how they're excited to use this tool, and I think that's a really good sign that maybe we have some backing behind the way that we're using this, and we design this tool that's really giving people at least a quick access to this information that otherwise might be nebulous or hard to obtain. So within the first 4 months, we had 7.2 thousand people use the site. We did it in a number of different places. What's interesting is this is a crop map on the left talking about where people are looking, right? So some of this, even how our site is being used, can be scrutinized for if it's equitable. Who's using our data, right? I wonder what. Yeah, there's questions about what are those? What's the makeup of those people? Those are all sort of questions that we have. What are the demographics of people using our site, and how can we basically get it, for instance, to the periphery? Because that doesn't seem to be a place that's really using it, and I think that's also might be a place where a lot of the issues that we're advocating for are quite prevalent. So there's a sort of discrepancy there that we have to be cognizant of. Things in terms of what people are really looking into and what they're interested in: tree canopy. Everyone likes trees apparently. Asthma, air pollution, surface temperature. It'd be really amazing to kind of see these sort of, how these are all related, what sort of, right? What's kind of coming together. Public seating. I mean, we like public seating. We were talking about it earlier today, but it is a bit lower. But nonetheless, there isn't this huge discrepancy. It's between 400 and 225, frequency of searches. In terms of actual metrics at a per city council district scale, we can see that You see this? Okay, I'll just read it. So dark blue is air pollution, light blue is asthma here. So we have like asthma happening over here. Asthma alley starts to come through here. The red is multiple, which again we would have to like break down a bit more, but you can start to imagine there might be a little bit more asthma there. Dark blue is air pollution, right? We have, let's see what Staten Island has here. They have park access. So there's a number of different ways, and I can post this online afterwards if you guys are curious to take a bit more of a closer look at this. But these are how people are looking at different metrics and what's essentially the most frequent lookup at a city council district scale. And then in terms of at a larger scale, environment, health, and mobility, and multiple, right? So environment is green, health is purplish, and yellow is mobility. So again, you can see the different issues, and what people are looking at just differs across the city. What people care about, what the issues are, might be reflected in that as well. So this kind of brings this presentation to an end. Let's see how I did in terms of time. Yeah. What we're going to do now, so we are hoping to develop this tool a bit further. I would consider this V1. This is the beta. We have 15 metrics. It's a quick tool to use. It's a quick way to pull things up, but it'd be really great. This is really just, this small tool for us to then bring a larger group of people into the conversation. That's really what we want. We're hoping to co-design this tool. So that's what we're going to do in this class now. But just some thoughts about what we might want to think about is what other metrics do we want? What other scales of aggregation are we considering? School districts, state assembly? How much we want to automate it? I mean, NYC Open Data has this whole API, which would be amazing. So far, this has all been a very sort of manual process. And to what degree? I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with anyone that has familiarity with doing API and CAT requests from Open Data. To what degree do we want to automate this? How much of the data processing? And those are all really interesting questions for us. How can we make the relationships between various metrics more clear, right? Do you want to have like a multivariate representation, scatter plots? How do we want to think about presenting that without necessarily detaching from our ambition to be legible and clear to the average person, right? That's an interesting challenge. And then, in a more realistic sense, in an applied sense, how do we get more people to use this tool, right? How do we get the people in, far parts of Queens to use this tool? How do we get people to really use this tool as a point of conversation and discussion? That's really what we want to have. We want to have this tool to facilitate conversation and facilitate coalition building and consensus generation. And that's the final point there. So what we're going to do, we're just going to,
what year is the data from? I'm not sure if you mentioned that already, but.
Yeah, the majority of it's 2021, 2020. We have, because of COVID, there are some things that we wanted to like backtrack a bit on just to kind of like have a bit more. But yeah, it's all, I think like the oldest data source we have is from 2018. And I think that was asthma rates, like prevalence of asthma.
Okay, so right now there's like no innovation in terms of updating C%.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So that'll be a big step in like the second phase. It's almost, without question, probably going to be a part of the process. But this was almost kind of like a little sample. Yeah.
You got a GitHub?
We do. Yeah, we have a public GitHub. It's a little messy, but we do. Yeah. Anything else before we break off into groups? And we also have like another 20 minutes for Q&A at the end as well. If we want to, we can do this process, and through getting familiar with the site, then we can return to some questions. So I'd say get into, just look around you, find someone, like, it seems like a lot of you have a laptop, but get into groups of 4 or 5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share, we're going to make a little Pechakucha for each group. So I think each group could give like a 1-minute presentation, but we're going to basically we're going to go through something similar that we've been doing, where we're going to just make a small analysis for a community board or council district, whatever you want to do. And I have these slides ready for you. So I'll share this, and you can just dump 4 or 5 slides into this presentation, and then we can kind of talk about it. But the idea is that we can take a neighborhood. So for instance, I'll take Council District 37. In this case right here, I'm looking at, let's start by presenting, one demographic characteristic of your choosing. So we had transportation mode, poverty level, race and ethnicity. You can pick what you want to present in terms of that. We're going to essentially build out a narrative. So we can look at, for instance, in Council District 37, 20.5% of households are living below the poverty line. And it also ranks 9th in terms of surface temperature. We can then draw a bit of a comparison through just a small juxtaposition here. We can see there's at least some, anecdotal relationship we can draw between where the, concentration of poverty level, again, darker means higher amount, and also surface temperatures, right? So we have that sort of relationship there. We're then going to take, again, this can be as sloppy as you want. Don't feel like it has to look good by any means, but you can just cherry pick some solutions that you're looking at. You can pick between any of the 3 core issues or whatever you want to look at. We can talk about what these solutions might be. And we're going to jump into Google Maps and maybe think about where this might be applicable. So I jumped down into Google Maps here, and I'm talking about creating a cool side of the street. So this is the north side of a wide street. It's almost purely concrete. There's a little bit of foliage, but the idea would be to just think about, and don't feel obligated to put any trees or anything, but where might we be able to do this intervention, right? Where might an actual place for us to advocate for to have this could be an interesting exercise, because it'll start to force us to think about space. And as we're walking through this, through our neighborhoods moving forward, we can start to have this a bit more of an analytical sense. And I think that's like a really good conversation and a really good analytical lens someone could have to think about their neighborhood moving forward. So let me think about how to share this. I'm on the Zoom. Are you all on the Zoom? No? Okay. So let me think about how we can do this. Will that work? No? Let's see. No. Who has a quick idea for how I can share this with everybody here? The QR? The QR could be literally stuck. Yeah, okay, so here.
If you do a new page and paste the QR, just blow it up even more.
There it is. Got it.
Why? Why don't know?
Yeah. Bit lead. Let's see. I'll have to log in. Here, I have an idea. I'm going to create this QR code. Whoops, that's the wrong way. Let's download this. All right, so scan this with your phones and then send that to yourself. Anybody want to come up and just quickly talk like 1 minute about what their experience was or going through? You guys want to? Did you put videos on the slides as well? Yeah. Okay, Rick, come on up, that too. You're the lecturer.
We dropped in, and the first slide called Team Front Row.
Team Front Row.
The first out here. Spatially adjacent. Yeah, we thought very long and hard about it.
Which one is it now?
It is the 3 slides with the pink tag.
Oh, Team Front Row, there it is. Okay, Front Row, that sounds really nice.
We figured to create some tag to spatially connect us.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak for us, I guess, Henry and Erica and Ely. We're just curious. Erica lives in Queens. I live in Brooklyn. And so we picked both of our neighborhood. We're curious to see like park access, race, ethnicity, and kind of the correlation behind that. So we didn't really come in with a clear thesis. We just wanted to see what's going on. So I think we had 3 slides. This slide is very helpful to kind of see where we rank between like the 2 dots we were looking at. And sorry, not very clear. We just took a screenshot of this one. This is Erica's neighborhood in Queens. This is my neighborhood in Brooklyn. And kind of looking at where we rank on the park access and how does that compare in terms of the race ethnicity. So I think there's already a pretty strong and interesting correlation that you see most people of more Latino and Asian and this specific neighborhood with a lot less lighter shade of pink of park access comparing to the more white concentrated area, even though that we can't really zoom in to see it, but I think that's kind of correlated with much higher park access. So you can kind of already see a little bit of this discrepancy there. Did I miss anything, Erica? Henry? The second one, Henry, do you want to take this one?
We could do the third one and then second.
Okay. The third one is we just played around with how else can we kind of visualize this. So we looked at, again, where we rank specifically in our neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens in terms of park access. Is there any correlation to asthma? And kind of similar in looking at, instead of a map, can we plot that on a chart and see where it goes? And then go back to yours.
And then the plotting helps us to zoom out to look at beyond just the 2 neighborhood areas. To see how citywide these issues rank in a simple graphic way.
Yeah. So I think that's our quick brainstorming. We had some interesting user feedback as well. I think we had a lot of discussion on the borders of city council or community versus neighborhood, and we think that it'd be really interesting if we can zoom in and have more granularity if we want to look at it within the specific zip code that we had. The other one that I think I'm really curious to look at is in terms of investments. I think a lot of these data right now is not specifically tied to the dollar value of either investments from the city front or ownership or property value specifically. And I think that could be something that's really interesting to kind of tie into and further illustrate some of the spatial equity or inequality in that sense. So, anything else I missed, Erica?
I think those are perfect answers, so I'll pay you later for that. Perfect. Yeah, that was a good bribe. Thanks. Does anybody else want to show what they were working on? Does anyone have a thought or put anything into the slides by chance? Come on up. Sure. What's your team name?
Laughter.
Last one. There.
Okay, so I work in the Bronx and I live in Arlington. I've been biking there for 5 years. So we wanted to do protected bike lanes in City Council District 8, which kind of spans my bike out as a kind of Barrett City School District, but as a Heath, Carlin, and Randall Island in the South Bronx. So it actually ranks pretty highly on protected bike lanes, and had anecdotal experience in that there have been a lot of new investments in bike infrastructure in the City Council District within the last 5 years that I've been biking there. So I'm curious to see if it's jumps in the rankings significantly over that time, but if there's a temporal aspect to other rankings that you count, to see how things are shifting over time. And just it's a static kind of data, but not really saying who's using the bike lane. I don't live in this district. I live in the North District over in Suffolk, LM, but I'm using the bike lanes, right? It's not residents of the district necessarily. We're using those bike lanes. And then some of the correlated data we found was traffic volume, bus lanes, traffic fatalities. So how do those interplay with each other? And then so not a solution, but a question about a solution, how to make the bike lane system actually protected. But a lot of times they're not protected by cars or other vehicles in the city.
Still the same. You with the musical. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. And the whole aspect of temporal analysis of is there a privileged moment in time that we would that on this website, right? And I think it'd be totally amazing to see essentially, the change over time or rate of change over time. Maybe an area might be getting a little worse.
It is never that.
But yes. Okay, that's the tradition. So last thing I want to have is I need to do this afterwards. There's so many great ones. We can all talk afterwards. I'm sure there was some really good things, but this is for feedback. This is a small forum. There's tons of different ways to think about and kind of articulate your experience using the site. It would be so meaningful if you can all just this has been such a privilege to have so many different people from so many different walks of life, so many different experiences coming here working together. It's been super short, but I think it's been super, super rich and super valuable. And I'd really love to capture your feedback as people all using the site. So please, if you get to list out, it will mean the world to us. This is going to certainly go into a second phase, which will think about temporal change, multivariate analysis, how we can articulate and make core plus more legible, how we can compare different metrics. These are all things that we've been thinking about, but it's really great to hear about school boards, different districts, the mind detail that might make or break something to make it useful. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
And that's the end.
I know you're happy to chat at anyone.